When HTTP requests come into a server, they typically have some data that the client wants to send along. So we'll have key value pairs that are sent along with the request. So these will be things like the username for a login and the password potentially. Or maybe we're not sending a password along, we're sending something else. But we have a series of key value pairs or pieces of data that are encoded in an HTTP request. And when we receive those pieces of data on the server side, so when those enter into the server and were received at a servlet, we have to convert those key value pairs to the objects that we use in the application. So, for example, when you have a servlet and it looks at the request and it's extracting the username and password and converting those into some representation of the user, maybe you have a user object, this process of looking at the data that's coming in and extracting information from it and turning it into objects is going to be called data marshaling. So this is how do we look at the data in the incoming request and convert it into objects or data structures that the servlet is actually going to use and operate on. This is what data marshaling is. And this is a really important concept when you're building cloud-based services, is figuring out how do you efficiently extract data from requests, how do you specify the format that that data should be placed into the requests, and then also, if we're sending information back to the clients, how do we do data marshaling in the opposite direction? So how do we convert our objects back to key value pairs that can go into some HTTP response, or maybe we convert that into some other format like JSON or XML. There's a whole bunch of different formats that we could use that we may want to convert this data to before sending it back to the client that requested it. So this process of taking data in one format, converting it to objects or data structures that we can operate on, doing computations in order to service a request, and then converting them back to some format that we're going to send back to the client, be it JSON or XML or whatever it is. This whole process is called data marshaling. It's a very, very important concept in cloud services. Another very important concept in this is a process that's called object mapping. And you'll see this quite a bit in Java in particular, is you have frameworks that can automate this process of converting. So object mapping frameworks automate the conversion of data to objects and vice versa. So this is what object mapping is we take in some data and then we automatically convert it to objects using some object mapping library. And there's a variety of object mapping libraries that are available. Things like Xstream, if you're working with XML and Java, or things like Jackson, if you're working with JSON and Java. And so these libraries help you so that you don't have to write the tedious and error-prone code of extracting all of these key value pairs from the request, figuring out which objects they represent in that request, and then constructing those objects and calling getters and setters to create the various values in that object that you want for the member variables, and then doing something with those objects. And then when you're done, taking each getter and setter and extracting the value you need and converting it back to the format that you want to send to the client. So object mapping is a really important process and a really important tool if you have an object mapping library to help you do data marshaling and cloud-based services.